G'day guys, in this video we are going to get to the bottom of 7 most common four-wheel drive myths when it comes to off-road tyres. We are going to uncover these by telling you what the myth actually is and what the truth behind it really is. There are a lot of beginners out there who fall for these myths, and there are some stubborn people out there who still to this day swear by these myths. So let's get stuck into it. Let's start with myth number 1. You don't need to air down your tyres. Some people truly believe this, and it's a pitfall for a lot of beginners. A lot of people have no idea that they're supposed to air down, and if they have no idea about it and then they get told this, it's a very dangerous myth. So the reason why people believe this myth are a number of reasons. 1, they just don't think you have to. 2, they believe that if you have a vehicle that's powerful enough power, enough torque, you don't need to air down because you can pull through anything. But you know what? That is absolute BS. I've seen some high-powered vehicles completely bogged to the seals because they have not aired down. So let's talk about the truth behind this. The truth behind airing down is the fact that when we go four-wheel driving, especially on sand, we need to keep flotation. The less air we have in the tyres, the more traction we have, the bigger the footprint we have, the longer we can maintain our flotation on top of the sand. You see, the smaller the footprint you have, the more likely you are to dig down. If you hit the beach with highway pressures, I'll tell you what, on 95% of beaches, you are going to sink, especially if you're heading towards the soft stuff. But there are more reasons for this, because you're probably thinking now, well, okay, so I need to air down for sand, but what about where I am now? Should I air down for this? Yes, you should be airing down for this terrain as well. And here are the reasons why. As we covered, flotation on sand, you may encounter sand out here. Mold to objects like rocks and sticks and just anything that comes up, even step-ups that come. Your tyres can mold to it and better drive over it. You'll have increased ride comfort, you'll have more control, and you're less likely of getting bogged. Far less likely of getting bogged. It also goes to help prevent the following: track damage, tyre damage, and of course vehicle damage itself. Because if you have more control, you're less likely to damage your vehicle. And that's about all I need to say, because there are some other myths that are going to cover the other things I was about to bring up. Airing down damages your tyres. Look, there is a tiny bit of truth to this, but it's mainly 95% bullshit. It's complete BS. First, let's discuss the myth. Some people believe that airing down your tyres to a low pressure, which we do to assist ourselves going off-road, damages the tyres. They think that the sidewalls bulging out is damaging the tyre, the cords in the tyre. They also believe that for some reason, having low tyres, you're more likely to get punctures from sticks and stones and whatnot. But that's not really the case. Now to the truth of this myth. Airing down actually does the complete opposite of risking your tyre. It actually prevents tyre damage. For example, this stick here. If you were to drive into this with a bit of momentum behind you, you got a 3-ton vehicle, 3.5-ton vehicle going onto this with a fully inflated tyre, I can almost guarantee you this is going to go straight in and puncture your tyre. With a deflated tyre, like say a low pressure of around 16 psi, maybe even 18 psi, possibly even slightly higher, it should mold itself around it. It'll have a better chance of not being staked by this. Now there are a lot of these sticks sticking around, and you should always avoid them in the first place, but you can't avoid them all. Now for the next part. Rocks. Especially sharp rocks like you'll see on your screen right now. That stuff there you cannot do with high tyre pressures. You're going to slash those sidewalls, you're going to slash the tyres. This particular rock here, if you were to hit this at full pressure, you are going to know about it. If you got your thumbs tucked in your steering wheel, yeah, you might do some thumb damage there. If you on the other hand hit this with a deflated tyre, like around 14, 16, 18 psi, you are barely going to feel this in comparison to a fully inflated tyre. We are now past 15 psi, so that's quite low. So it's about 14 psi now. This is what we'd use on the beach quite regularly, especially with the 315s or the 35-inch tyre. But let's keep going, because these tyres can take a fair bit of punishment. Now, I did say there was a tiny bit of truth to the myth. If you abuse your tyres at low pressure, yes, it's not going to be good for your tyres. For example, if you, after a four-wheeling session, you hit the highway and you can't be bothered reinflating your tyres, well, you're in for a bit of damage on your tyres. If you drive at a high speed for too long with like deflated tyres, like sub 20 psi or sub 25 or sub 30 psi for that matter, you could do damage to your tyres. The lower the pressure, the more damage you're going to do at higher speeds. It's going to increase the temperature. It's the temperature that kills the tyres. The other part of the small truth is the fact that you can get low profile tyres which do not belong off-road in the first place, but they cannot tolerate pressures of less than 35 psi. Anything less than that, the manufacturer doesn't guarantee the tyres, and they do split. Now, we've seen this on Discoveries with 19-inch rims and these rubber band tyres on them. It's a real shame they're making these capable vehicles and making them so incapable by putting these big rims and these thin-ass tyres on them. They don't belong off-road, they're no good. So if you are in that situation with 19-inch wheels, maybe try and go down to an 18-inch or try and get more sidewall tyres. Go for a bigger tyre so you can actually deflate the tyres a little bit and you have a better chance off-road. It's time for our next myth, and this one is one of my favourite ones to cover and reveal to you guys, because I used to believe this one in the early days until I tried it myself. And that is, mud tyres do not work on sand. They should never be used on sand. Mud tyres are absolute crap on sand. It is actually total BS. Now, the reason why people believe this and will believe it, and the reason why I believed it too, was mud terrain tyres. They're aggressive. They are designed to dig for traction. So when you are going through mud, these aggressive blocks here with the big aggressive gaps in between them, which are self-cleaning, they're designed to dig for traction and eject mud so you don't end up with a slick wheel. So with that mindset, if you've never driven with mud terrains on sand, well, you're probably going to believe it too. Now for the truth behind it. And I'm just going to purely go on experience. I live in Western Australia. Western Australia has lots of beaches, lots of desert, and I would say 75% of our driving is on sand when it comes to off-road. Sand, sand, sand. Sand dunes, beaches, long sand drives, sand tracks, desert tracks, you name it, desert sand dunes. There is so much sand. And on all of these different types of sand, I've driven with mud terrain tyres. Mud terrain tyres are totally fine when it comes to sand. Totally fine. I'm not going to deny that all-terrain tyres are better on sand, but how much better are they? To be honest, not that much better. If I had an all-terrain tyre on here exactly the same size, I could probably get away with going a few less PSI down in pressure. And the reason for that is not the tread pattern, it's the strength of the sidewalls. A mud terrain tyre is stronger and will need a bit less PSI inside the tyre to have it gain the same footprint because the sidewalls are so strong. That is the only difference, people. Mud terrain tyres on sand, absolutely 100% good. And here comes the next myth. And there's probably going to be a few people who are going to be stubborn about this one. And the myth goes, wide tyres are better for sand driving. Okay, this one's going to take a bit of explaining, but people believe, or some people believe strongly, like very strongly. There's articles on the web about it. There's some people that are really into the thinking of a wider tyre is better for sand. Now, the reason why I believe that is because it's wider, so they've believe it's going to sit on the sand better, given that the tyre's wider than a narrow tyre. The fact of the matter is, when we lower our tyres, we are not going for the width of the footprint, we're going for the length of the footprint. And the reason why this is important is the fact that the length of the footprint is the direction of where the tyre is going to rotate, is our rotation direction. The width of the tyre, the wider it is actually going to hinder us a little bit. It's going to create rolling resistance. You got more to push through the sand. On a lot of sand driving, half of your sidewall is buried underneath the sand. You are pushing sand as well as you are driving at the same time. It's a bit of a battle between the weight of your vehicle and the density of the sand. So when your tyre is wider, it is going to create more resistance. So the best way to explain that is think about a tank with the tracks. The tracks are very long, they're quite narrow, and that's how a tank gets its footprint. Take like a half track, where they have the wheels on the front and they have the track on the back. They are narrow tracks, they're not like this massive wide track. Tractor tyres. Take that for instance. That is also another way to explain to you. It's a very tall, long, narrow tyre. Perfect for driving on sand. So therefore, having narrow tyres on sand is better than wide tyres. But the difference probably isn't worth to worry about. But, you know, it's a myth. People say wider tyres are better, which is not true. So, you know, some people will still argue with me, but I'm always going to go back to the tractor and the tanks. Why do they not have wide tyres? Because narrow tyres are better. I'll probably upset a lot of the people that are firm believers in wide tyres on sand. I'm now going to flip things around in this myth, and the myth goes, narrow tyres are better when it comes to ruts and when it comes to mud. Now the reason why I think it's better in mud per se is because when you drive through, you've got less rolling resistance. Okay, you can't argue that, I guess. The other one is when you're driving up the ruts, you've got less contact with the banks on the side, so you've got less resistance climbing up and climbing down hills, rutted hills that is. You can't argue with that either. But the truth behind that is, it is kind of a bad thing. Now, not having resistance, yeah, sure, you're going to drive a lot smoother, but when the tough gets going, you are going to need as much traction as you can. Having a wider tyre through a bog hole is going to help you. Why is that? Because if you're going to play in the mud, or you're going to drive through the mud and you have mud tyres, or you have aggressive tread patterns, you are going to want to use your aggressive sidewall to help you and assist you keeping your traction and keeping you moving forward, keeping you from going down a hill too fast. You want to use every part of your tyre. That's why we have this aggressive pattern on the side here. In actual fact, if you go through a bog hole and you start to lose traction, you can wiggle your steering wheel left to right, turning your wheels so they sort of nudge the banks and then they get more grip. And it actually helps a lot for when you are, you know, slowly just battling through a mud hole. That can be the difference between getting out and getting through it. Now let's talk about ruts, and let's talk about wet ruts before we talk about dry ruts. You're going up a wet, rutted hill. What's going to save you? What's going to make the difference between you getting up and not? The aggressive sidewall tread pattern. That is going to make the difference to you. As you're going up the hill, your vehicle's going to, maybe bounce around because you need a bit of momentum. These side botters are going to help you because they're on both sides, and the wheels in the rut is going to wiggle its way up. It's going to help you get up. If you have a narrow tyre, you've got more space in between the sides. It's not going to be as effective as a wider tyre. Let's now go to dry ruts. Okay, you're in the summer or you're in a dry winter, you're going up a rutted hill. Generally speaking, when the ruts are dry, you try and stay out of them. And when you try and stay out of them, you want to crawl along them. Sometimes you have to cross over them. Sometimes you have to straddle them, which means you're driving right on the edge of the rut. Having a wider tyre gives you more purchase on what's hanging over the rut and what's not hanging over the rut. You got more tyre to play with, more meat to play with. So you've got more surface area. If you have a narrower tyre, you're more likely not to be able to ride both sides, for instance. You're more likely to slip in. You have to be more accurate with a narrow tyre because you have less surface area to play with. So therefore, truth be told, wider tyres are far better when it comes to mud and when it comes to rutted country. Well, I guess I may have left you guys wondering what you should do then, because narrow tyres is better in sand and wide tyres are better for rocks and ruts and mud and all that. You know what? Just stick with wider tyres. I've had wide tyres for a very long time and they go fine on sand. That resistance is not worth worrying about. So you know what? Wide tyres, all round. But if you only drive on sand, yeah, sure, if you want to get technical, narrow tyre is going to be better. Hard tyres are better for rocks and mud. Now we've kind of covered this subject a little bit about hard tyres, but we haven't specifically gone into rocks and mud per se. So the belief is if you have fully inflated tyres, hard tyres, it's better for rock driving because you bounce over the rocks and you know, you're not going to risk deforming your tyres and hitting rims and whatnot. That's what a lot of people worry about. They also believe that driving through mud, they're better off with hard tyres because it's going to dig better for traction. So here is the truth to all this. Let's tackle rocks first. When you're on rocks, the last thing you want to do is to be bouncing around. If you have hard tyres, you're going to need more momentum because there's more rolling resistance to try and get over this rock because your footprint is so small. You got this tiny little footprint that you got to try and drive over all these rocks with. It's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of momentum to bounce your car around. And the last thing you want to do on rocks is to bounce around because then you lose all control. All control is just gone when you're bouncing around rocks. You may have seen this in many YouTube videos. People just pedal to the metal, they're bouncing around, they're losing control, the vehicle rolls over, or it smashes into a tree, or it falls on its side, or whatever the case might be. There's always carnage and damage when you're bouncing. Never ever bounce. You ask any rock crawler or anyone who tackles rocky terrain every day of the week, they're going to tell you the lower PSI, the better it is because you grip to the rock. You got more of your footprint molding over the rock. You can really climb over it with slow speed. You can really crawl over it and have all the control that you need to get over these obstacles. Because if you don't have control and you're bouncing around, all the vulnerable components underneath your vehicle is going to be subject to damage because you don't know where the vehicle's going to land. So always lower your tyres, especially for rock, but just take it nice and slow. Rocks, you're meant to drive nice and slow. Then you won't damage your rims or anything. Let's talk about mud. With mud, you do not want fully inflated tyres. You do not want highway pressure going through mud. Yes, it's going to probably clean the tyre a bit better because it's going to spin a lot more. It's just going to inject mud everywhere, but you're not going anywhere. You're basically just digging holes and you're just sinking and you've got far less traction because you've got this tiny little footprint. So picture you're in a sloppy mud hole. If you've got this tiny little footprint that needs to find traction, it's not going to do much for you. The bigger the footprint you have, the more likely you are to find a rock or a stump or something, or even just the base of that mud hole, so you can keep going. The smaller your footprint is, the deeper you're going to dig. The wider it is, the less likely you're going to dig down, and the more likely you are going through this mud hole. Now, fully inflated tyres are going to be an issue just for even like muddy sections. You're going to be sliding all over the place. You need a bigger footprint. To one of my favourite myths to cover, trailer tyres do not need airing down. Oh man. People believe trailer tyres do not need airing down, although they lower the tyre pressure on the vehicle. They believe that it doesn't need to be done on the trailer because the trailer is not effectively providing drive. It's not driving, it's just being towed, it's being dragged. So therefore, they believe you don't need to lower your tyre pressure on your trailer. The truth behind this is you need to lower the tyre pressure on your trailer. And most of the time, you more than likely need less tyre pressure in your trailer than you do in your vehicle. When I tow my trailer around, or any trailer that I'm towing around, the tyre pressure in those trailers will surprise you. Sometimes they're down to 8 PSI because I'm not getting the flotation on the trailer because the trailers are so light. So the heavier the trailer that you tow, the more you can match it to your vehicle PSI. So that's the best way to find your trailer PSI. There's, you know, you can look for the footprint. That's a good way to do it visually. You can lower a 40 PSI trailer down to 25 PSI and it may not change much at all because it is so light. But the reason for you needing to lower the tire pressure on your trailer is so you don't destroy the track behind you, because you can't feel what's behind you. The car's driving nice and smooth because you got that down to say 16, 18 PSI. You're cruising along, the track feels beautiful, all those bumpy as hell, but it feels beautiful because you have gone to the effort to lower the tire pressure on your vehicle. But the trailer behind you is getting ragdolled. It is getting smashed around, or your cargo is getting smashed around. Your tires are in fact the first part of your suspension. They absorb the first impact. So the lower tire pressure you have, the safer your cargo is going to be, the safer your trailer is going to be, the less track damage you're going to do, because that trailer behind you is going to be jumping up and down, tearing up the track, more than you think. So please lower the pressure on your trailers. There we have it. That was 7 most common myths when it comes to four-wheel drive tires. And look, if you used to believe in some of these, don't be embarrassed about it, because some of them are actually quite believable. And you know, you really got to look at them and have some experience as well to sort of work out what is true and what is not. So if you have any mates that could benefit from this video and enlighten them, please share it around. Give it a thumbs up, and coming up, a video on general four-wheel drive myths. Now this one is going to be even better because we're going to cover suspension, we're going to cover your freewheeling hubs, bind up, all kinds of stuff that gets thrown around out there in the community that is so untrue. So stay tuned and be enlightened.